I just thought I will give you one historical story about the Amba to underscore its power. In the late 19th century, the Prince of Wales visited Bombay, and as custom for his previous visits, he was entertained for dinner at the Sassoons in Bombay. At the end of the dinner, it was customary to give a gift to the prince or any honored guest. And what do you give the Prince of Wales, who is going to embark on a 3-week journey back to London? So Flora, who was the matriarch of the family at the late 19th century, gave him amba and mishmishibis, dried apricots. When he got on the boat, he obviously began to try it. And he wrote her upon return to London that he really didn't know what it is. He opened the jar and took a small spoon with his lunch and liked it so much that he made a decision on the spot not to share it with anyone who is on the boat. Later on, he wrote her a letter thanking her. And then there is a letter also from her nephew writing to his aunt, telling her what a genius move that was, because it strengthened the relationship between the Sassoons and the Prince of Wales and royalty, all thanks to Amba.
Culinary diplomacy.
The power of the Amba. Okay, so we'll have a chance, and I hope to see also other people who, great, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, can I just say my mother also banned amba in our house because of the smell, and since Baghdad, we have not been able to touch it, so it's kind of like a haram thing for us in the house. I'm just curious, do non-Mizrahi Israelis recognize that amba is an Iraqi, part of Iraqi cuisine, or an Iraqi thing per se, or do they consider it as a national Israeli dish now? And I asked this because of the whole debate that happened quite a few years ago about falafel and how Israel kind of considered an Israeli cuisine or invention, and there was a whole debate about that, but I'm just curious about the amba part.
Okay, would you like to respond?
Sure.
Can you speak at the same time?
In one voice.
In one voice.
Perhaps I can start with an alternative story that that circulates among Amba fundamentalists, and that the story of the chef Joël Robuchon, the French chef who apparently visited Jerusalem for the celebration of the city, and took with him a jar of amba. And for many chefs who tell me that story, this is how amba started to go global. So Robuchon perhaps is the chef is the prince, the parallel of the story of the prince. I think the beauty about amba. And my second story is that in a couple of days, I'm going to do most of my work on food is on wine and borders, so the politics of wine and territory. And in a couple of days, on Thursday, I'm doing at Royal Holloway tasting, kind of a presentation and tasting of border wines, and we'll have Lebanese and Syrian and Israeli and Palestinian wines, and even an Hungarian wine. And when I posted it on Facebook, immediately there were reactions of why did you include, by Palestinians, of course, why did you include, but not only, why did you include Israeli wine in the category of conflict wines? And of course the questions of appropriation, etc. With the wine debate, with the amba debate and amba and Iraqi studies, it never came up. And I think this is significant to understand the special position of amba as not politicized as in the same way that hummus wars and falafel are. And we can discuss later why is Amba not prone to this form of politicization and why it is not an iconic food in the nationalist mode.
Thank you. Yeah. Here, yeah.
Fascinating Amba, it's going to go on and on. But of course, one thing that hasn't been mentioned is Amba in the Indian context, because in fact, mango pickle, achar, is a common Indian condiment. And what is the interesting question really is how the Amba in Iraq, how it differed from and what was the process of this differentiation, given that the brands that came to Iraq and which are typically Iraqi also came from Indian manufacture. So why is this distinction still there? Personally, I prefer the Indian Amba to the Iraqi one. But because it's nicer. Yeah.
His objective.
No, it's a different taste. The other question, the other issue is that in fact Amba in Iraq went alongside a whole range of other pickles. And one of the almost distinctive in Iraq but common in Iran was the pickles of vegetables that were made with the wild garlic, which was called thum ajam, the Persian garlic, which is musir in Persian. So that was another quite distinctive. I think it was quite common among Jews in Iraq, and also the red pickle of the shalgham, the left pickle, which is again common in the region, but also was commonly prepared. So I think maybe we should see Amba in the two contexts. One is that it actually came from India, where the Indian Amba is so different, and how did the Iraqi Amba become differentiated? Mm-hmm. And the other one is that Amba was one of many pickles that were on the Jewish table.
The intertext of the pickles, we'll call it. Okay, I'm trying to see other. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, Lillian.
Thank you. Just following up on that, I was curious if you came across Amba in medicinal contexts. So something that came up in my ethnography was Amba in relation to breastfeeding. So given,
Hilbe.
yeah, yes, exactly, with the hilbe, and also just occasional anecdotes about healing properties, that sort of thing.
Pregnant women were supposed to fancy Amba.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
We didn't really.
Oh.
I can comment on the.
In Israel, there are helbe pills are sold for, for women.
Sure. Okay. Also, yeah, just here a question.
We heard about Amba and about literature, and I want to quote a literature of Amba. Somebody wrote a little poem, and just not ask me to translate it in Arabic. يا أنبتي يا أنبتي أنت جميع سلوتي أسلي نفسي بك وفي شباك معدتي أحببتك منذ الصبا واليوم في كهولتي لكل هاو كعبة وكعبتي في كبتي في أنبتي.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Trying some different.
Hi, I've got a question for Hana. Just about the reception of the leftist literary tradition in Israel and Palestine. How did the public receive it? What was the readership?
It's a little bit hard to actually measure that, but most of that literature that I'm talking about went out in newspapers, and there are actual statistics about the amount of like itihads and al-jadids that went out. I think in certain period it was like itihad at least went out to like 10 to 15,000 people a month, or if it was a daily newspaper in the issues, but. Also, there was a phenomena of people being read to from the newspapers themselves. So people who didn't read, having family read to them or friends read to them from the newspapers. But I think the main thing to consider is that only obviously Arabic readers and speakers would have had access to those newspapers at that time. However, there was literature that was cross-published between Itihad and Al-Jadid and Qol Am, the Hebrew communist newspaper. So some of those pieces, or a collection of those pieces did end up being read by Hebrew readership, but it was quite limited. Not during the time of the embargo, but afterwards, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Emil Ubaden.
Just a little supplement to what Sami was saying about amber. We used to have amber sold in the streets, and it was given to you in a samoon, which is a bit of bread, and they pour it in. Hardly any mango in it, and it was mango powder. I don't know how they did that. It was powder with a lot of liquid in it, and that's how. Yeah, that's the cheap one, exactly. It may have little bits, of mangoes in it, but that's how they did that. That's all I wanted to add, really. The other thing is that I believe that it wasn't done in Bombay. It wasn't manufactured in Bombay first. It was in Pune, which is close to Bombay anyway. Am I right?
Yeah. Can I comment on what Sami asked? I think one of the main distinctions, perhaps, between the Tulshi, the general repertoire of Tulshi, and Amber is the association with Basra. So Lamiz Ibrahim writes in her cookbook about people going specifically to Basra, to these specialty shops, to get specific kinds of amber. And I think it's also because it came from India, so the fruit wasn't part of the terroir, if you will. So it has this kind of transnational identity, and it's embodied in Basra, in the urban escapes of Basra.
Nira. Yeah.
I just wanted to confirm, I heard, when I came to this country, I went to an Indian shop and I asked for amber, and they just looked at me like I just descended from Mars. They don't know what's amber. And what I later discovered, that ambo is the mango tree in Indian, and this is how the name amber came about. So if you can confirm. And just to answer Emil, you can get a powder of amber, mix it with vinegar and water, and you get the shiris, which is only and regarding sabih, in addition, now in the UK, if you go to Jewish bakeries and ask for sabih, you can order a platter of sabih, which is quarter of a pita bread with a slice of egg, fried aubergine, and tahina.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Do you want to comment on that, or should we move to the? It's up to you.
Yeah, I mean.
Amber is handy for mango.
Okay. So next question, Yossi, we wanted to.
Yeah, I want to.
Yeah, Yossi, please, and hopefully there will be also questions.
Just relating to what Daniel was telling us about, which is kind of a quasi-fictional, quasi-real story. Actually, my cousin, one of my cousins, married a Moroccan woman, and he was really, I mean, in love with Amba. And at the time she said, well, look, you know, we got to this point, it is either me or the Amba. And I'm serious. And it was an intractable dilemma for him. So what he's going to do? So he said, well, at the end of the day, he gave up on Amba. Well, it turned out that didn't help very much because they got divorced. And then he said to me, you know, but now I can eat Amba as much as I can. So.
Thank you. Okay, there at the back. Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to have, yeah, Ronen. In the back over there, yeah. Yeah, over there. Yeah, I'm just trying to get a lot of people who.
Hi. To Sigal, just to mention that Miriam Al-Mula's work has been researched, and a book about, in which she figures out very highly, was published in Iraq two years ago by Khaled Al-Lemi, an Iraqi researcher, who wrote a book about women, Jewish writers.
Yeah, I know about that book.
Anything you would like to
No.
say? Okay.
Thank you, Ronen.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. Over there, yeah. Since we're
On a serious note, simply because food history is so complicated, so a question to you, and perhaps another to Hana about literature. It is very difficult in food studies to know what we're talking about, in the sense that if a text is being translated, we have more or less identity relations, whereas Amba is a magic formula. It's not a product. And the question is how you follow it and decide that this is still more or less, or can be considered by consumers to be the very same things. Just to give you one example, most of the things which is called coffee in the 19th century is simply very dark and hot. It is made of anything, and it has very little coffee in it, but it is accepted as coffee. So there's a whole family of products that runs under one number. So I wonder, this is a structuralist in me, how do you define, so to say, the basic formula with its equivalences that you can replace one material, one ingredient with the other, to say these are the journeys of the Amba. And to the wonderful piece about literature of the Ma'abir, I would just note that that something more must be going on there. First, I think it should be, perhaps it might be important for you that the alliance between Palestinian communists and nationalists and the Iraqi ones is also based on the fact that they're not simply communists but anti-Zionists. This is part of their background. So whereas some of their Ashkenazi communists come sometimes from the Zionist movement and then move elsewhere, there's a different way of talking about Zionism among Palestinians that they can share, and it sometimes are testified, it can be shown in the political literature. And there are internal differences when you come to speak about colonization, because different people mean different things when they speak about istimar in the 1950s Palestine. And it would be very interesting to go on and see not only commonalities, but different understandings of what communism and liberation are about, even through and precisely through the literary texts. Someone like Jabra Nicola has a different ideas. Emil Tuma published one of the first pieces of Al-Jadid, something about the liberation of women, which is an amazing piece that you know. So they're actually not only cooperating, but also bringing in different colors and different understandings that might actually explode in the 1960s.
Oh, yeah. What, actually, no, but we have to have your response.
I just wanted to add on a short question because it follows up on that. So it was just occurring to me as I was thinking about Hana's paper and Sigal's paper that essentially the thrust of the stories is very similar, because you're talking about, a tradition of social critique that goes back to the roots of the Iraqi short story in the 1920s. And of course, Sigal, you situate that within Arabic literature more broadly, and its long-standing engagement with social critique. And Hana, because of the context of Al-Jadid and its connections to the global anti-colonial movement and to the Communist Party in Israel, you resituate it kind of within kind of the frame is that, sort of the root of the transit camp story can be, found in this anti-colonial literature and al-Jadid. But I'm thinking that essentially the stories are not very different. I mean, the stories that you're looking at and the stories that Sigal is looking at, and just really the main difference is the venue of the publication. And it's the publication and the ideological, framework of the publication that's giving you that interpretation. More, it's sure the context of the stories is that they're in the transit camp. But the type of critique is very similar to the types of critiques that they were enacting in their writing while they were still in Iraq, the substance, and so I'm kind of just thinking through that and wondering if the two of you could comment about that. I guess the question in a nutshell is how important is the context of the actual, organ of publication, the newspaper, for framing how you're thinking through the stories and situating them contextually?
Thank you. Would you like both of you to respond?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's all true to a certain extent, but it's also, so I mean, I guess I should just say initially that I think because this material is not very well known, and so the first task almost always when I do presentations is just to present it and kind of say, this partnership happened, it was based on these connections. But obviously there are very big differences in terms of the ideological and social positions of the writers. And I think they are bound around anti-Zionism. I think that's one of the things, for sure, definitely. But I think, one of the issues is that if they're drawing on Soviet Marxism and communist ideologies, that doesn't necessarily provide them with a good analysis of colonialism and racism. It is a very sort of blanket and doesn't provide nuances. And you have people coming from different communist backgrounds. I mean, Jabra Nicola was a Trotskyite. Some of them were Stalinists. The Iraqi Communist Party was a different party than the Palestine Communist Party, and the Palestine Communist Party before 48 was comprised of mostly Ashkenazi Jews and Palestinians. So I think that in order to get into all those nuances, it's first it's the binding factor, and then it's the nuances. And obviously the nuances and the differences are what split them up in the end in particular ways, and give them also particular kinds of continuity and sort of a follow through that starts in the 50s and changes in different ways in their own work. In terms of what you were asking, Lieutenant, maybe Sigal, you can speak to this too. I think one of the things I'm trying to say or trying to discuss is that all of these different traditions kind of blend together here. Yeah, I do think there's the sort of Iraqi short story, and also I think in Palestine, the Palestinian short story is also about, in certain ways, about social critique, the early short story. And then it kind of blends in with the socialist realist influence, and they blend together. So what I see when I read this work is quite a lot of similarity between the Palestinians, people who are rooted in the tradition of Palestine, and people who are rooted in the tradition of Iraq. And I think that what the binding element is literature of the Arab world of that period, Marxist literature. But there's probably differences as well. So I think that's kind of interesting thing to think about. Do you want to?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there are, maybe you can find similarities in when they speak about tradition, Westernist, but there are also differences. I think I don't know if I read all those stories in the literature writing that you speak about. Yeah. Oh, so I said that there are similarities and differences between these stories. I didn't read, I don't know if I know or read all these stories that, so I don't think that I'm able to answer that, but I think that there are differences and similarities because the Iraqi Jews didn't write about Zionism. I can't find Zionism in their writings, in the literary short stories. But I can find similarities with all the Arab writers and Palestinian writers in the sense of writing about things like, writing about the tradition, about women, things like that, Orientalism, colonialism.
I mean, one small point, just to kind of ping back to your question about the venue, the significance of the venue. It's just one of the things I also think is really important is like how did these people develop as writers? And I think that, the context of them developing in certain ways collectively because there's a newspaper that they all read and they all participate in as part of a debate and part of a kind of a melding is why the venue is important in a particular way. Yeah.
The political element from it and this dimension of Palestinian and Arab and communism, and for this short period, just after they immigrated to Israel and they had no really an outlet except this outlet of the Jadid and all this kind of things. Most of these people actually departed from the communism after a few years. They were no longer communist because that kind of was political element shared maybe at that time between the Palestinian and the Iraqi Jews as a way of expressing also themselves in Arabic. So they had some kind of commonality because of the situation, compared with what happened with the Palestinian. But deep, if you strip that out, you will see those kind of, stories have commonality of actually protesting against the society, against some of the issues, some of the discrimination, some of the poverty and that kind of thing. That's really what I...
Yeah, just a quick comment about that, which is to say that I do think that it's important to kind of sit on the fact that this was an anti-Zionist publication, and they didn't have nowhere else to publish. There were other publications, there were at least 2 or 3 other publications in Arabic that they could publish in. Like, this was a specific project that was tied in with kind of communist and anti-colonial aesthetics. And at least 2/3 of the content was international. It is a particular kind of milieu, but I do agree with you that social critique is an important genre, and it intertwines with various different kinds of ideological elements of that period of time.
Thank you. There is also still, we're kind of a bit jet-lagged, and there is still a response to Gadi that
Thanks, Gadi. Thinking about Amba structurally is truly challenging, if only due to the paradox that mango, after which Amba is named, is not essential to Amba. So Amba is basically Amba-less, because like the Amba that Amal circulated has no mango, and basically I think 90% of the Amba that we consume is mango-less. So it is, it is defined by its consumers, so it is, if we follow the Thomas theorem. But if I may, sorry, yeah? If I may, it's also challenging because, so first it's really anti-essentialist in many ways, almost by its definition and definitely by its history. For us, I think it encourages us to think about food in 2 ways, or at least 3 ways. One is the relations between food and place, following the conception of terroir. So does Amba index or refer to a place? We can think some foods like, Kubet Mosul is about a place, right? The Burgundy wine is about the place. We can think also about food in terms of know-how. So Italian coffee has nothing to do with Italy, but we for some reason associate coffee with Italy because Italy appropriated the knowledge of the savoir-faire of producing Italy. And we can think also about it in terms of what the Bourdieu has this food space where we can follow the different capital associated with food. And all of these seem a bit inadequate to talk about Amba because indeed it is diasporic from the outset, as it were. And we're still looking of the way, it's clearly not an iconic food or not nationalized or definitely not politicized like falafel and hummus are. And one of the examples was Linda's Facebook page, Israel في اللهجة العراقية, where they translated our Haaretz article without asking for our permission, but it was beautiful. without even mentioning us. Then when we asked the question, of course, they added our names. Anyways, I have nothing bad to say about it. We got, like, there were hundreds of comments. I mean, it was, as we see a bit today, for some reason, Amba, were we presenting about falafel as an Israeli, as a non-Mizrahi, etc., it would have been immediately about me. Whereas here, for some reason, it's not the messenger, but really there's a genuine interest, especially among Iraqis in different diasporas and the homeland, about this. I mean, how many foodstuff trigger poetry like the one that we heard today? I find it quite spectacular.
Thank you. Yeah, one more. Yes.
I would like to refer to the collaboration between journalists and writers, Iraqis and Palestinians, and to compare it to what happened to Iraqi musicians and Iraqi Palestinians. And this is a fascinating love story. The first steps took place very short time after Iraqi Jews arrived in Israel. They had oud, they had kamanja, they had qanun, and these are very delicate instruments, and they didn't find anyone who can fix it for them. They were very frustrated. And then one day they found out a guy in Nazareth. I forgot his name, I'll remember in a minute. So the first step was taking the oud to this guy to fix it. So the Iraqi Jews had a past of a coexistent, a very close relationship with Muslim musicians and Muslims in general. But the Palestinians never had such a relationship with Jews. I mean, they knew all the Ashkenazi Jews from the first Aliyah, second Aliyah, etc., but they never met Arab Jews. So first time they went to this guy, they went to him on Saturday because they were working during the rest of the week. They went to this guy and he fixed the oud and everything was fine, but he was amazed. He didn't know that Jews actually play Arabic music. And then little by little, this oud player told his Kamanji friend, go there, they are very good. Little by little, every Saturday, they used to meet and play together for hours on end. And a very close relationship forming between not only this guy, but his friends, because he told them, you know, these Jews, they play Arabic music so well, you have to listen to them. And then little by little, a very close relationship was formed by Iraqi musicians and Palestinians. Since then, we have a lot of variation of this very close relationship. Even with musicians who are very religious Orthodox Jews, they still have a very close relationship with Muslim and Christian Palestinians. The very important thing is that both sides realized we are not talking about politics. We are going to share our love to Arabic music, culture, language, and even in the case of food, I remember 10 years ago, there was a choir that, in Jerusalem, Tiferet HaMizrach. It was a choir that was associated to Shas and all these. And they had rehearsals in Jerusalem, and they invited me to the rehearsals. So the Muslims sat on one part of the table, and the Orthodox Jews sat on the other part, and they ate different food, but they shared the fruits together. So they had the different food at the beginning, and then they moved to another table and shared the fruits together, and then finjan chai and everything. So it was very interesting. This dynamic became so natural to them. There was an agreement, and they didn't even talk about it, that we have our customs, our beliefs, you have your customs, your beliefs, we respect it, and we still can collaborate because we have this great love for Arabic music and culture. And this is something that I think we should celebrate, and I didn't hear it yet here, and I want to tell you that this is a very important component in the relationship between Jews, Muslims, and Christians of the Middle East, and they're all Arab Jews, Arab Christians, and Arab Muslims. They have this tremendous love to this culture and to the language and to the poetry and to the music and to the food, and they share the same customs and manners. And if we will talk about it more and more, practice it more and more, celebrate it more and more, research it more and more, we will create some kind of a bridge that will give us the ability to communicate again and to focus on the similarities, and with these similarities try to find, for heaven's sake, try to find a solution for coexistence. Thank you.
Thank you all for your papers and presentation. Thank you all. We now take a break.